Hey guys, Lockie from Focus Performance Training. This week what I want to talk about is our conditioning protocols and how we actually can develop sound tests to get the right prescription for our conditioning or what we're doing to improve our aerobic capacity. So one of the things that I'm starting to play with myself is 3 different time, specific tests for running in particular outside of the stock standard MAS prescription. Now, let me just dive into a few of the acronyms that I'm going to actually talk to today and what they mean specifically. So the first one that I want to talk to is MAS, or maximal aerobic speed. Maximal aerobic speed is the lowest velocity at which your VO2 max occurs, or the lowest speed at which maximal oxygen uptake occurs. The next one that I want to talk about is functional threshold power, or FTP. That is the fastest speed that you could maintain for 45 to 60 minutes. Now, a common test to determine your FTP is a 20-minute continuous effort on, for example, a bike. And then from there, we take 95% of the average wattage across or power across that 20-minute time domain as our functional threshold power. Now, MAS is generally used for prescribing intervals anywhere from sort of what I've seen longest being 6-minute intervals all the way down to 15 and 30-second intervals, or even in a Tabata style prescription. Functional threshold power has been more commonly used and more so traditionally used in cycle training, and they have 6 different zones within the FTP which they can prescribe off if we want to push towards or bias recovery, or if we want to walk towards more anaerobic threshold or power development training. Now, the power development training can go upwards or up to 150% of your functional threshold power, with your recovery being down towards your 55 to 60%. So how am I applying these 2 different terminologies or trains of thought into prescribing and testing for running performance so I can prescribe more effectively? Well, initially I saw that using your MAS prescription being in meters per second, so what velocity they moved at, wasn't as accurate for prescribing longer efforts because, well, your MAS has taken over a 5 to 8 minute test. That's during the time frame that is required for an MAS test to be accurate. So if we're starting to prescribe longer distances, we can start to see more error and more chances of error in accuracy of actually being able to hold or get the required stimulus. In the same sense that when we prescribe strength training, if we're taking an estimated 1 RM off a 10 rep max, there's going to be a larger margin of error than if we took it off a 5 or a 3 or a true 1 rep max. As far as I'm concerned, they're very, very similar principles here. We're just applying them to do different stimuluses. And what I like to sort of emphasize here is that I try to take a principles-based approach to my programming and sort of testing so that I can apply it across a broad range of modalities so that it is consistent. So that's where I started playing with the idea of functional threshold power. How far can someone run in about a 20-minute block? Now, for some fit people who have a good running base, you're probably looking around a 5-kilometer effort in 20 minutes. Give or take 500 meters, which is pretty good. Like a 20-minute 5K is 4-minute effort, 4 minutes per K, which is decent. So from there, we can decide what their meters per second is or what their average velocity would be for those longer time domains that they can maintain for longer periods of time. What we can also do on top of this is start to add in some shorter time domain work, such as a 400-meter sprint. Now, I use the word sprint very loosely here because I want it to be quite a hard effort, but it's not the same sprint that you would see in, say, a 100 or 200 meter effort sprinter in the Olympics. Mainly because the people that I've worked with for this haven't got sound sprinting technique as of yet, and I don't want them to go balls to the wall, for lack of a better term, in this 400 meter effort and risk tearing a hamstring just for testing. So the way that I get around this is I ask them to do a hard effort that they feel could be repeatable, get them to rest for 4 to 5 minutes, aiming for as close to full recovery as possible, and then go again. And look at where that sort of average 400 meter pace would be and use that meters per second. So from there, we can actually start to graph this out and we can start to see how this looks. Obviously, your speed in the 400 meter is going to be a lot quicker than your 1600 and your 5K. However, if we can start to look at this and see that the speed decrement or the fall off isn't as large or is larger than what we would expect, then we can start to ask some more questions and hypothesize that maybe this athlete could have issues with getting effective amounts of oxygen to the muscles over a long period of time. They could have some issues with their cardiorespiratory fitness, which may need some more work at lower intensity so they can be more comfortable running for long periods of time and delivering oxygen to those working muscles. On the flip side, if someone's 400 meter run is quite slow in comparison to their 5 kilometer run, we can start to think that, hey, look, maybe there may be some issues here when it comes to their ability to utilize oxygen at a rapid rate, so they can't produce as much power as we would think they could. So this is going to very much bias what the low-hanging fruit would be for that athlete in their conditioning. For someone who struggles to develop power and has a slow 400 meter time relative to their 5K time or even their 1600 time as that middle range, we can start to develop or prescribe more higher intensity, shorter interval efforts where we're looking at really pushing them quite hard and getting closer and closer to their maximal effort, up around that 95 to maybe 120% of MAS. In addition to that, we can also look at what their 400 meter times were, and we can prescribe 400 meter splits or even 200 meter splits based off that time and double check that with their MAS and where that falls. And then to go one step further, we can look at where that MAS falls, where that meters per second falls in regards to where their functional threshold power at the certain intensities would be with at what percentage. So we can start to see where things might marry up here using the 3 different tools. It may be triple tapping, but it's a way that we can start to see or identify similarities or differences in an athlete's ability to perform across different time domains. We know that if someone has an excellent 5K run, but if they're quite slow, they're going to have problems producing power effectively and really getting out of the gates quite hard. Now, for some athletes, that may not be a problem. But for other athletes who need to be able to produce power consistently across a longer period of time, for example, a breakaway in rugby union, this may be something of interest. Moving forward, that actually might be of more interest to someone, say, in a tactical population where we do need to see high bursts of power over extended periods of time. But we also need to see the ability to recover and to maintain a high level of work for a longer period of time, which is where that 20-minute FTP test might hold greater weight than a 1600 meter or a 400 meter test. That's not to say that the 1600 meter test wouldn't be useful at all. It's incredibly useful because that gives us an insight into an athlete's VO2 max, which we can start to use as an identification factor if they're getting stronger or getting fitter or not. Now, there are some issues with VO2 max. We try and leave VO2 max as a relative score, so relative to their body weight and how fast they're using it per minute. But there still may be some inconsistencies there depending on, for example, if someone has a VO2 max of 60 millilitres per kilogram, but they only weigh 70 kilos versus someone who's got a VO2 max of 54, but he's 90 kilograms. Yes, the 90 kilogram person may not have as high a VO2 max, but they're also moving a lot more weight around their frame. So we could hypothesize that the 90 kilo person to get that 55 millilitres per kilogram is actually working a lot harder than the 70 kilo person with a 60 millilitres per kilogram VO2 max. And this is where some things can come and start to become a little bit inconsistent with VO2 max. That's why I tend to use it more as an indicator for indication of fitness rather than a true sort of insight into their fitness. So if you've used MAS before, if you've used a 1600 meter or 400 tests, or if you've played around with longer running stuff, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what your thoughts are. If you think this has merit, because this is something that I'm playing with just based off my observations, and I'd love to hear your insight. So if you have got some experience with this, leave a comment down the box below. I am not the best when it comes to riding conditioning programs. I know the basic principles. I know how to drive stimulus and overload. However, I am by no means a triathlete coach. I am not a marathon coach. I am not a long distance running coach. I develop conditioning specific for sport requirements. So if you do have expertise in those fields, I'd love to hear from you and love to get some sort of, dialogue started around this. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope to see you soon, and I'll throw some stuff up about MAS and FTP throughout this week.